Okay, so let's look at part two. That is the Jenkins job that we'll be creating. So over here, as you can see, I have an EC2 instance that is running my Jenkins server. So as you can see, my Jenkins server is online right now. It's running, and let's head to the Jenkins dashboard. So this is my Jenkins dashboard over here, and this is my Jenkins job that I've created. So we actually did a build for the working video, and let's have a look at the console output that we got for that. So over here, as you can see, the first line itself mentions that this build was triggered by a GitHub push event. So that's clear over here in the first line. Over here, next, what this does is it deletes the existing workspace and starts afresh. Then it clones the Git repository where we have all our files. It clones the repository, and after cloning, it then it then conducts a Maven build. So it then executes a Maven build. So over here, yeah. So over here, as you can see, so this is all the logs that you can see for a Maven build, and at the end, the build was successful. Then after that, what I've done is I ran a couple of shell commands for the Docker. Okay, ouch, I forgot to remove this. I was actually testing whether the shell commands work or not. So yeah, I mean, evidently they do. But so yeah, this is where the main party starts. So the first thing that I do over here is I build a Docker image. So and the Docker file that was existing in the Git repository is used for the purpose. So over here, as you can see, as I went over the Docker file earlier, so this is all being executed, and it says that it successfully built this image. It successfully tagged this Docker image too, and I guess this is probably redundant, this design, but yeah. And then after that, the last thing that I do is I push this Docker image onto Docker Hub. So this push over here is being made to docker.io/haramrit09k/docker test, which is this thing over here. So as you can see, we have this existing, and if you go back to the console output, so pushing, yeah, and it pushed, and the final output that we got was success. So we were successful in uh, making changes to our repository. Then the GitHub. So yeah, the workflow is simple. That after a push is made on GitHub, the GitHub repository is cloned. Then a Maven build is executed to create a new war file, and now this war file is added to a Docker image, and this Docker image is at the end pushed onto the Docker Hub. So yeah, that's about it. And let's also look at the configuration files for this Jenkins job. So I read somewhere that people use Jenkins files that are text files for actually configuring the Jenkins job, but to be honest, I found this much more intuitive. So I'll just show this entire configuration here in the video itself, because it's difficult for me to actually uh, include it in the submission. So over here, if you look, we mentioned that it's a GitHub project, and we mentioned the URL over here too. Then over here again, source code management, GitHub, repository credentials, and all the basic settings, the default settings. The build trigger, obviously we're using the GitHub webhook trigger for detecting whether to build or not. Then the build environment, as we saw earlier, the workspace gets deleted, so that's because I have mentioned this setting over here. Then over here in the build section, firstly we execute a Maven build. So that's over here in this section, and next I execute a couple of shell commands. So these are over here. So yeah, and that's about it. So the last command is docker push, and after pushing, my Jenkins job is successful. So this was part two. And now part 3 will be taken over by Ajit, where he'll be explaining about the nuances of Rancher and Kubernetes cluster. So I just
So, yeah, so I'll be going through the Rancher process in this, and as you can see in this total project, we use 4 EC2 instances. Haramrit used one for creating the Jenkins server, and I'm using 3 EC2 instances. As you can see here, there's one instance for the worker node, there's one instance for the cluster node, and there's one more EC2 instance, which is actually the Ubuntu based Rancher OS. We are using Rancher to deploy the Kubernetes cluster. So to access the Rancher, what I have done is we already have the Amazon AMI for the Rancher, and we already get it with the Rancher OS. So we just need to install the Rancher and copy this to clipboard. So once we run it, so this is how the Rancher UI looks. I have already set up to the default login. So as we can see here, there are 2 cluster available, but one problem is the version 6, it failed. So we created a newer version, which is the version 7. And this is actually the cluster name, the V7. If I click on this cluster, I can see that there's 2 nodes in this. One is the V7 cluster, and there's one more which is V7 worker. So these are the IPs of both this cluster. If you want to directly access them, you can even access them and directly write the kubectl commands and do all kind of stuff directly with the IP address. And basically, when we were starting with Rancher, what how we created the cluster is that first we go to go global, and then we go to add cluster, and once we click on the add cluster, it asks us to set up some default keys and cloud credentials. So if I can show you the keys, no, not the keys, the cloud credentials and the node templates. Cloud credentials are the one which we get from the Amazon. It has our access key and secret code. So I've already created this, and we just keep using these nodes to create more cluster and more nodes. The next thing is the node template. I think I can show you the node template. Yeah, so the node template is basically whenever we use anything to create a cluster or a worker node or anything, we directly use this node template. It's a one-time job. So yeah, this is the details of the EC2 instances which will be created by Rancher. So if you can see next here, it's asking for the VPC in which all the clusters will be in. Next, we need to select the security groups. I already have the security group, which is the Rancher nodes. Then the next job is to select the instance type which the Rancher will be creating on Amazon. I basically use the same cluster for again and again to create more worker nodes or more cluster nodes. So the one of the major point which we faced in this Rancher process was the SSH user, which is one of the most common issues. It should particularly be Rancher, otherwise it will fail if any other user tries to access it, because by default Amazon, the Rancher creates the EC2 instance with this username, the Rancher username. So yeah, that's pretty much it about the templates and node template to create cluster and the worker nodes. There's one more important concept to when we want to pull an image from Docker Hub. So how do we do that? If we click on the cluster, which is the version 7, this is the current running cluster. We go to the default. Default is the namespace. It's just like a virtual provider we have in the cloud. It's here is default space. So in resources, if I go to secrets, we need to set up something called as registry credential. Registry, it can be any registry. We are using Docker Hub, that's why I've named it as Docker Hub. And in this registry, when we create a registry, we give all our credentials like the username and password. So in this particular registry, I have Haramrit's username and password. So this is universal. This is accessible to the whole rancher. So whenever we try to create a workload, basically I'll be showing the workload in the next few minutes. And so whenever a workload is trying to get created, it directly accesses this registry, and